The idea behind this project was to teach kids about how cars work. We thought, why don't we come up with something that uses nitromethane-powered remote-controlled cars? They're a lot like real cars. They have an internal combustion engine, they have a suspension, they have a transmission, a clutch, they use universal joints to drive their axles, and they're fun. So we put together 4 teams of 2 students who would work on the cars every week and then race them on the weekends. There was Jason Roney and Matthew of Team Water Bottle, Thomas and Jimmy of Team Doubtful Confidence, Terrell and Christian of Team Turbo, and Joseph and Jason of J&J Racing. The goal for week 1 was to take everything off the car. The engine, the wheels, suspension, transmission, radio receiver, everything. In week 2, they'd put it all back together in time for their first race. Team Water Bottle ran into their first challenges pretty early. It turns out the previous owner had epoxied the wheel nuts onto the car. There were also leaks in their engine from worn gaskets, so they spent a lot of time trying to get things working. It turns out that getting everything back together and working is really hard to do. Only 2 teams were ready for the first race. J&J Racing took home their first win with a pretty convincing lead.
So you guys came out with a lot of confidence. I'm so confident.
The next race was going to be a drag race, so the focus for that week was going to be on the carburetor. What it is, how it works, what does it mean to have a rich or a lean fuel mixture ratio, and how they can tweak it to get the best performance. Team Turbo was able to get their car running this time, but their drive shaft kept popping out of position. And so they tried to come up with all different ways to solve this problem, and they were out of time. They were on the racetrack, their race was coming up in 5 minutes, and they needed to come up with something, so they grabbed some duct tape and they tried to wrap it around the shaft that's moving at 30,000 RPM and hope for the best. Okay. Meanwhile, Team Water Bottle was having their own problems. And it was the problem that ended up giving them their team name. The wheel kept falling off. Ever since they cut the wheel nuts off the wheels and tried to fasten new nuts on, they couldn't keep the wheel on the axle. So while they were doing their warm-up laps, one of the wheels fell off the car. They figured they could just screw the nut back on, but it turned out that the threads had stripped and they would need to come up with a different solution. And with only a little bit of time, they ran back to Vector Space. They came back out to the racetrack and they superglued the nut back onto the axle, drove it for another warm-up lap, and the wheel fell off immediately. And that was when Jason, in a moment of desperation, looked around the parking lot to see what he could find, and he sees a piece of trash. He runs over and he grabs it, and he puts it on the bottom of their car, and he starts wrapping it with duct tape, and he says,
I have an idea. We go like this.
He straps this water bottle onto the car like a ski. Nobody thought it was going to work. And the first race was against Doubtful Confidence, who was expected to win. I was standing at the finish line, ready to call the winner. And I don't know if it was because the race was so close, or because I was so amazed at how fast Team Water Bottle was, but I could not tell who won. We had a camera on the finish line, so I grabbed it and I ran back over to Vector Space. I popped the SD card into a computer, and I slowed the video down to frame by frame. I emailed the winning frame over to Jordan, and I ran back over to the racetrack, and as I was running over, I hear a scream from the racers. It was double elimination, so Doubtful Confidence would have to win the next 2 races to win the whole series.
Thomas, Jimmy, how are you guys feeling right now?
Pretty good.
You don't even have to practice race?
We already did.
Thomas didn't seem worried. They took their first win. The third race was off-road, so we spent the week focusing on the suspension. Each of the teams rebuilt their shocks, they drained and replaced the oil, they changed out O-rings, and they replaced or straightened any shafts that were bent. Team Turbo couldn't get their engine started, and Team Water Bottle had sheared their crankshaft. So the only 2 teams in the off-road race were J&J Racing and Doubtful Confidence. And because Doubtful Confidence insisted on having a high compression ratio, they had a hard time starting their engine. So J&J Racing took the win. In the following weeks, we focused on electronics and the engine. Every team built a circuit to measure the temperature of their engine. Some teams decided to add headlights to their car too. And despite everyone's reluctance, they all rebuilt their engines, taking off the cylinder head, taking out the piston, the connecting rod, and the crankshaft, cleaning everything and putting it all back together.